Here's what happened. Adrienne, change happens to all of us, and that can lead to changing our priority and focus as we move into new chapters of life. What is the mission you're on in this current chapter of life? This is Make Burnout Extinct. I'm Robert David Weeks with Adrienne Crowley.
All right, starting off with the big questions. I think, so my mission, I'd say like with work and life kind of overlaps because my mission in work is something I'm applying to myself. And so really, I say women because that's who I tend to work with, but it's to empower women who feel stuck after loss or a major life change to rebuild their life. And the way I think that this is best done is by establishing like gentle, compassionate self care practices, and that might look like journaling, walking, whatever it is that kind of keeps you even, helps with your emotional stability, your resilience, and also kind of digging in and figuring out, okay, all of these hard things have happened. How do we turn that into the fuel for your future? Because for me, that is what has gotten me through my hardest times, is figuring out like, where's the lesson here? What can I take forward? And how can this make me stronger? And so I guess to kind of like sum it up, it's to help people go from surviving to thriving and to create sustainable wellness routines. And really, it's all about building that confidence and showing up how you want to in life.
What are some myths that come up for people when they're stuck that you've noticed, or that for your own personal experiences?
Okay, so I think one of the biggest things is after, especially for women, after you go through something difficult, you almost feel like you don't deserve to pour into yourself. You're taking care of everybody else. There's all this stuff going on. You have to hold all of it up. And I know for me, myself, in the past, the first thing that has gone has been really the habits of me taking care of myself. And that's where I found that I get into trouble, essentially. So I think, first of all, feeling like you don't deserve that, or you have to come last, almost like you're giving yourself the leftovers. Uh, Absolute myth. If you don't take care of yourself first, you cannot take care of everybody else in your life. Um, Another thing is lack of time, right? So people think, all of this chaos is happening or something bad's happened and I've got, these shifting priorities. I don't have time for these habits. Like, where am I going to get an hour to go for a walk or to journal or to do some deep breathing or play with Legos? That's one of my things. How am I going to get the time for this? Really, I think you need to kind of take a pause. If you don't have like 30 minutes a day for yourself, like you do not have a sustainable life, period. You just don't. And so lack of time is another one that when I first start working with people and we're talking about, what habits do we want to implement? What does that look like? One of that first things that comes up is, well, I don't have time. You do have time. It's like, look at your smartphone, right? It tells you what your screen time is. How long are you spending on apps? How long are you spending watching TV, or just kind of doing things that are busy work that you really don't need to be doing? So we look at some of that stuff. I think another thing is they feel um like they're not connected to themselves. So it's, I don't know what this is going to take, or I don't even know where to start, or um nothing makes me happy right now. That's another big one. And the thing is, for me, I have changed tremendously throughout my life. Like if you knew me when I was 7, 17, 27, now 30, 39, like there has been evolution there. And there are some core things that have always brought me peace, always made me happy. Like reading is one of those things. Legos is another thing. Um, I say that a million times because it's playful and it's meditative at the same time, which we can get into that. But um, so I think like thinking you don't have a thing, or you don't know what makes you happy, or there's nothing that can because things are so difficult, that in itself is a myth. Like sometimes you have to go back to the drawing board, and it might sound ridiculous, but really think back to, what did you like when you were 7, or what did you like when you were 17, when you had all the time in the world to essentially do what you wanted. Start doing some of those things again, and see where that leads you. It's that curiosity, I think, that really we tend to lose sometimes, especially when things get chaotic. But if you can kind of go back to that and just stay curious and check in with yourself, you'll figure out pretty quickly where to start with all of this.
Well, I want to break those three down even more, like going through those because they're powerful. That first one, where do you think that comes from for us to think that we like either the shoulds like shouldn't take care of ourselves, or we just aren't able to focus in on us in those moments? Like where do you feel that comes from?
I think, so for me, I think a lot of it came from the way that I was raised. I grew up with my mom, and my grandmother helped raise me too. She moved in when I was really young, and they were the caretakers of the family. They took care of everything, and often to the expense of themselves. And I think I just saw that modeled for me. And I think that is a trait of previous generations, our parents, our grandparents. They were the ones that like were the glue of the family. They took care of everything. And I would see that in my mom. Like she would put the family first. And, if we needed more money, she'd get a second job and do all of these, like whatever it took kind of thing, but often at the expense of her health, her mood, her sleep, stuff like that. And I think culturally that's a thing. Like you have to hustle, you have to push, and there is a time for hard work and for definitely like being productive, but you have to ask yourself like what's that costing you? And I think somewhere along the way we've lost that a little bit. um there's this message is like more is more, almost like if you're doing more, you're producing more, you're going to have more. And I think there's a tipping point there where if you're not asking yourself like, is this actually benefiting me, is this worth it, you're going to end up kind of in a tricky situation, if you will, like where you're costing yourself your health. And I think it's that where everybody feels like almost like it's selfish or self-indulgent. Like if you're like, I'm focusing on me today, like that kind of sounds a little douchey, to some people anyways. But the thing is, if you don't do that, if you don't have that time for yourself, like you can't focus on anything else or take care of anyone else. And that's something I think I've kind of learned the hard way. So that's why that's a big part of what I do is like, we really need to hone in on how do we carve out this time for you? Because if we don't do that, everything else is going to fall to pieces.
Well, the modeling that I think about that in my own life, it resonates of just what I
Mhm.
saw externally. And then as a kid, especially modeling then that and moving that into my adult life. Like I was like, that makes so much sense. And
Mhm.
then there was this other thing that came through I noticed in my own life where I would feel guilty. There was this
Yes.
guilt there, and I really had a hard time trying to unpack that and understand that for myself, and notice what's actually going to be helpful for me, and then what's like something that I put out on some like as a should for what everyone else
Mhm.
feel like, how I feel I should show up for everyone else. So yeah, what comes up for you with when it comes to guilt?
I think the guilt, like you said, the shoulds, right? So if you think about how much time you spend every day consuming inputs from others, whether it's the people you're talking to in your life, whether it's the podcast you're listening to, as we are both podcasters, uh, like the TV you're watching, the books you're reading, how often do you go outside and take a walk and you leave your headphones at home? Like when I do my walks, that is like me time. I don't have any inputs for at least 15 to 30 minutes, depending on how long that walk is. Like, because we don't give ourselves a break. And so much of what we consume these days is other people telling us, well, if you just did this, then you would have this result or you would achieve this goal. And we get on this track of chasing these things that other people are telling us we should be doing. But if we stop and take a beat, a lot of that doesn't necessarily translate for every person, right? Like what might be the thing for you may not be the thing for me. But if I just keep trying to hammer away at doing what you're doing because that's what I should be doing, well, I'm just going to be miserable. So I think like the inputs has a lot to do with it. We don't take a break from the outside noise very often anymore.
And what came up for me was the need to belong and be a part of the
Yes.
group without interpreting if this is in alignment with who you are and your values and where you want to go in your journey in life. So that was interesting. Like that came up as you're just saying that.
Hmm.
I never thought about it in that way either, of this like tribal energy that we got to get stuck
Hmm.
in. So how would you even start the process of figuring out what you're going to resonate with, like with having that time outside of any distractions coming in? That feels like one. Are there other ways that we can start to reconnect with understanding what's actually going to be in alignment for us?
Okay. So I want to cover the piece about like the belonging. one of the lessons that was really hard for me to learn is saying no without guilt. So when I was younger, I would say yes. Like if you're like, hey, Saturday, let's do this. And on Saturday, I knew I needed to, take some time for myself. I have a book on deck that I want to read, and maybe I'm just going to watch a movie. I'm going to have a really quiet day, quiet night kind of thing. Or I'm going to grab lunch with my family and then kind of pour into myself the rest of the day. But you're like, hey, let's do this on Saturday. When I was really young, I'd be like, yes. And then Saturday would roll around and I wouldn't want to do it. And I would make myself go do it. And then I'd say like in my 20s, not super proud of this, and anyone that knows me that's listening to this may recognize that this happened, but you'd be like, hey, let's do this on Saturday, and I'd be like, yeah, that sounds great, and then Saturday would roll around and I just wouldn't do it. And sometimes I would text you back and be like, oh, sorry, this thing came up, but sometimes I just wouldn't say anything, and I'm like, oh, that's really awkward. But I knew that wasn't the right thing for me. I just didn't know how to say no. And now I feel like me now, like my time and my energy is mine, and I'm not going to apologize for using that in the way that best suits me. And so if you're like, hey, let's do this on Saturday, like it could just be a sorry, I'm not available. It might be no, I can't commit to that right now. But it is a definitive no. And hey, I really appreciate you thinking of me. I can't commit to that this Saturday. I'll get back to you. Maybe we can get together in one of the coming weekends or something, right? Like there's a lot of ways to say no that's not unkind, but for a long time I internalized that saying no was like I'm slighting this person, and that's just not the case. Like I'm saying no because I don't have the capacity for that, and that's because of me, not because of you. And so I think getting out of the obligation to say yes to begin with is a huge thing that we need to practice and get comfortable with. And like I said, it took me a lot of years, and sometimes it can still be uncomfortable, but now I realize it's more uncomfortable and more unkind to say yes and then have to say no at the last minute. So it's a practice, but I think I just wanted to throw that out there for anybody. Like your time and your energy is yours. So even if you get caught up in what everybody else wants you to do or what you should be doing, like you have to do the right thing for you, or else you're just going to make yourself miserable and possibly sick.
I think about that in my own burnout journey of what led
Mm-hmm.
me. One of the ways that led me to my 2018 burnout was lying to
Yeah.
other people, and going back to, if that, like similar to what you talked about of, they say something of, oh, like, do you want to go do this? And then it's like, oh yeah, I do, when I really don't. Or if someone asks me, how you doing? And I'm like, oh, I'm doing all right, when I'm not. So it
Mm-hmm.
was like lying comes up for me as something that was difficult to have to work through. And that came through repetition. But for me, my spark was what I saw for the result of my life leading into that burnout, because I lied. Um,
Mm-hmm.
what for you, was there a moment for you that sparked the change, or one like experience that comes up for you where it may have been really difficult to say the truth of, okay, I don't want to do this. I'm going to put a boundary here. Um, and you were like, it was that fear that was coming up of like having to do that, but you did it anyway. Is there an experience, like a specific one that comes up that felt like a spark for you?
Yeah, I feel like so I live I'm living in Idaho now, but I've lived away from my family for a long time. And when I go back to Boston, um my family, it's kind of like cram all the time we missed into this short period of time that I'm back there. And sometimes, like city life is not what I'm used to anymore. So it's like, going to the game, going out to dinner, waking up the next day and doing, filling it with all of this stuff. It's it can be difficult for me sometimes when I go like, oh God, I got to keep up with this pace. And I would say when I first started saying no to my family, that was one of the most uncomfortable things, because I felt like, well, I live away, and when I'm here, I have to do all these awesome things that are planned. But then I got to a point where I'd just be like, yeah, I don't want to go out tonight. I'm really tired. And like, I feel like the first time I said that, I'm just like dying on the inside, because I'm like, I'm disappointing everyone. And then I'm going to fly to like across the country and not even be able to do this. But I just felt myself like running myself ragged while I was back there. And then I wasn't showing up as my best self. I'm grumpy, I'm tired, I'm all of these things. And so I feel like a couple years ago, visiting back home, that was kind of like the first time where I was really like, okay, if this is not for me right now, I need to say something, because they don't know how I feel. They're just like super psyched that I'm there and let's do all this cool fun stuff. And I feel like disappointing them felt harder than disappointing anyone else. So once I was able to do that, it was like, well, if I could do this with them, I could do this with anybody in my life. And I feel like that kind of like, I don't know, was the catalyst almost to be like, this is okay.
It's so powerful because I resonate with my own family, specifically my parents, having to tell them
Mm-hmm.
after my burnout a few years later, saying I'm not okay and that
Mm-hmm.
I need help, and just going and saying that to them. Even the prep, I remember, like, you have to have that pep talk inside of like,
Yep.
I can do this, I can do this, I can do this. And then you say it, and it's just like feels like you're free falling once you say the words out to them. And like gratefully they were just like, you're like, oh yeah, like, yeah, we love you no matter what. Like
Mm-hmm.
that was my fear, was like, are they gonna still love me if I feel like I'm not this perfect, have everything all together? And that was what held me back for so many years. But stepping into that, once I did it, similar to what you just talked about, it then realized everything else for anyone else is so much easier because
Yeah.
you've been able to do it with your family. And that's such a powerful insight.
Mm-hmm. That's what I think. If you can figure out, like, what person do you fear disappointing the most, or like you absolutely don't want to let down, and if you can speak your truth to them first, speaking it to anyone else is going to be so much easier. Like, it's kind of like you just got to get past that first hurdle, and once you do that, you'll see like, oh god, that wasn't as hard as I thought it was going to be. Oh, they still love me, they accept me, they want to be there for me, whereas until you do that, of course there's all these like catastrophic stories in your mind. But once you can kind of break that barrier with that person that you worry about disappointing the most, I think everything else becomes a lot easier.
When it's that reminder, as I think of it as an adult, it's like, you will survive this. Like, there are words that you are saying to this person, and you're doing it with compassion, care, respect, like it's, or however you say it. It's like you're going to, even if they don't respond peacefully to you. I remember this quote. I think it's from Tony Robbins, where it's like, they will still get, it will give you peace, even if it's not a
Hmm.
peaceful conversation. It'll give you peace of clarity of now having said it, and realizing that you survived this thing.
Hmm. I think you mentioned Tony Robbins. Brene Brown says something like clear is kind, and talking about like being very definitive in your responses to people. And I don't remember if it was a book or a talk that she did where I took that in. And I thought about that because of the stories that we tell ourselves. Like, if you committed to something with somebody and then you cancel last minute, that person might be wondering, well, what did I do? Or, they have their own stories. And so I think, like, if you think of that in the context of, if somebody did this to me, how would I think about it? And your mind can kind of run away with you sometimes. And so if you think, for me, that helped a lot, thinking clear is kind. So if I just give like the clear, honest answer, even if it's uncomfortable in the moment, it's uncomfortable for them to hear, it's uncomfortable for me to say, like, in the end, that is the kind thing, because there's no room for like, let me make up these insane stories in my mind, because I don't know about anybody else, but I do that.
Yes, I'm with you on that. Yeah, and it's another reminder of like, the small wins lead to the big wins. It's those
Hmm.
moments where even just the courage to be like, I'm going to go do this, that's a small win to check off, to continue the
Hmm.
momentum, to actually go for the big win of saying the thing.
Hmm. You had asked me about like, how do we like figure out what is for us when everybody else is telling us what we should do. I wanted to hit on that really quick because then I went on a tangent about like time and all of that. So I think especially as we get older, we feel this pressure to have everything figured out. Like, you're supposed to know what you like at this point. You're supposed to know what makes you tick. But the thing is, like, all of these things happen outside of us, like all of these life circumstances, and all of those things, whether they're good, they're bad, whatever emotional charge you want to put on them, they leave their mark and they change us in some way. And that leads us to change our preferences, to change our opinions, our beliefs, whatever it might be. And I think it's perfectly normal and natural to be like, I don't I don't even know what I want. I don't know what makes me happy. It's not, I don't think it shouldn't be as scary as I think people find it to be sometimes. It's just like an evolution has happened and you need to recalibrate a little bit. And Jesse Itzler, he has this thing he calls daily vitamins. And when I was in his coaching group, that was one of the things that he would talk about. And it's basically making a list of things that essentially re-energize you, make you happy. It's not for anybody else, it's just for you. It can involve other people, but it doesn't have to. It's just stuff for you. And you make this list. And if you don't know what those things are, start with what you knew before. Like, what are the things that used to make you happy, and kind of start there. And it's just experiment and try. And it's like, follow that curiosity. If you're reading an article online about this painter or something, and you're like, oh, wait, that thing they did seems kind of cool. Like, you're not a painter. You never thought about painting. maybe you should go take like a community class and like, just follow that curiosity wherever you're like, hey, that's kind of interesting, or I want to know more about that. There's a reason for that. And even if you don't see yourself as the person that does whatever that thing is, like I was never the person that did endurance races. I was never the person that, ran marathons or did like 29 Everesting events. Like I was the awkward kid that was literally allergic to gym class my entire life. Like I did not want anybody to see me doing anything quote unquote athletic, because when I did it, it was not athletic. It was a mess, honestly. But as I got older, pushing myself in that way, like seeing other people do that, that sparked something in me. And I'm like, I want to be the person that does that. I want to be the person that figures out how far can I push my body. And I didn't have that desire when I was younger. Like I said, I literally was like, what excuse can I make up to not have to go to gym class on Friday, because I'm going to die of humiliation if I go. That I was the kid that was picked last. Like it was not great. And now, like if you knew me when I was younger and into my teens, or even like when I first got to college, and you're like, oh, I'm going to do a triple marathon, they're just like, who the hell is she? Like, but I had that curiosity seeing other people do these events, and I started like 5Ks. Okay, that's kind of fun. Could I do a half marathon? Let me try it. And even if it's absolutely miserable and I'm terrible at it and it takes me 7 hours when it takes everyone else 2, like we're just going to see where it takes me. And then I was like, wait, I enjoyed that. It hurt. It wasn't like super fun in the moment, but like I did that and I like that feeling. And so then it's like you keep pushing. And so I think following whatever that curiosity is, if you see somebody and you're like, I love what they're doing, or I admire that, or I think that's cool, start there and like experiment. Okay, maybe you hate it. Well, you lost a couple hours on your Saturday and now pickleball is not for me. Like, but figuring out those activities and then having 1 to 2 of those every day where you carve out a little bit of time to do that thing that lights you up. And it could vary, you can make that list and it could change day to day. But if you're not doing 1 to 2 of those things every single day just for you, like you're going to end up burned out. It's the inevitable. You have to take time for the things that make you happy, that light you up.
There's two, I remember seeing on what you had shared, 2 of your non-negotiables, which is the journaling and walking. So why did those become the 2 for you?
Okay, so I have been journaling since I was in 2nd grade. My family, we took this trip across the country from Boston to Arizona as a road trip, and we went in the Warner Brothers store in downtown Phoenix. And my mom was like to me and my brother, you guys can, pick whatever souvenir you want, kind of thing, within reason. But, you could pick something that you want. And I remember like my brother, he got like a shirt and some type of like toy thing. I mean, I was in 2nd grade and I got this hardcover journal. And my mom is like, I mean, the pages are blank, right? Because I always like to read and I'm like, yes, I want to write, And so I started journaling when I was a kid. And of course, that practice has evolved and changed over time. But for me, if I don't kind of get out whatever's in my head, especially the stuff that's like swirling around, that will hold me up all day. Like it will interrupt the work that I'm doing. I won't be able to focus on conversations. So for me, just getting everything out of my head and onto a piece of paper, it's like kind of emptying the noise. So it doesn't need to be like a 6-hour long thing. Like 15 minutes is perfect. I mean, some days I do write longer, but I think 15 minutes just to kind of at least like stream of consciousness, get it down. Like Julia Cameron recommends morning pages. That's like a big thing that's popular. And it's 3 full pages of stream of conscious writing. And that is helpful. But if you're like, oh, 3 pages, that's scary. Like 15 minutes, whatever that fills up, just keep writing. Like that will save your sanity. It has for me since I was a kid. And I use journaling in a lot of other ways too, but that's kind of like that 15 minutes of just like the brain dump. I have to do that every day. And the other thing is walking. And I like to do at least 15 to 30 minutes. Perfect day, I do it in the morning and in the evening. And that is not like my workout time. That is just like the me going out, no earbuds in, just kind of like paying attention to what's around me and just the quiet stillness of only the noise of, like I said, whatever's around me. I'm not putting anything into my ears. And for me, I have found just going outside, first of all, making sure that intentional time to spend time outside, that in itself has been huge. I think, especially working from home, we don't necessarily realize unless we're really paying attention to how much time we're sitting behind the computer inside. and just getting outside and taking like a breath of fresh air, like that's a novel experience. But I have found like making the walk and the journaling, it just, I feel so much clearer. I feel calmer. Movement too, kind of, I feel like it moves energy through my body. So if I like, maybe I wake up and I don't feel as motivated or excited about whatever I'm going to work on that day, I go for a walk and it just kind of like clears that out, like whatever that stagnant energy is. And I come back with a fresh perspective. And so, yeah, I do have more of like an elaborate routine that I do on like my best days, but on my worst day, walking and journaling, the two non-negotiables, because physically and mentally I feel so much better, and then I can step into whatever my day needs from me, essentially.
Going into movement, I talk about that a lot, and
Mm-hmm.
the how energizing that can be for your body. And what I learned, it was from Dr. Casey Means, in the book Good Energy, also written by brother Callie Means. And it was how by creating movement over a long duration of time, you're actually creating more of these mitochondria within the body
Mm-hmm.
that then can take the ATP and produce more energy for you over a longer period of time. So literally, it's the body deciding, okay, you're moving more, we're going to create more energy, and that energy you can then take into other areas of your life. And I think it's so mind-blowing to know how
Mm-hmm.
powerful movement is, no matter what that is, even if it's just shaking your arms out for a little bit.
Yeah.
Any type of movement can like that impact is powerful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really, like jump up and down for a few minutes, put on a song and dance around, like go outside, like you said, to like shake your arms, like just kind of shake it out. Like movement really does just it changes your state. It does. Like there's no way that it doesn't. I have like in my worst mood, like I know, okay, if I get on my Peloton or if I go take a walk, I'm not going to feel like this when I'm done. Like doesn't mean the problem's solved or it's gone away, but I'm not going to feel this bad about it. And like that has never steered me wrong.
Yeah, it's like that after feeling. It's like always being reminded of that, because at first it's like you're gonna feel that stuck energy, but then
Mhm.
afterwards, I can't even remember one time that I didn't have some feeling of energizing, like uh, energy moving through me
Mhm.
after movement. So you also talk about something like the first win of the day. And it
Yes.
was like about how that can build momentum. You specifically talked about making your bed. I resonate with that because I'm someone that makes my bed every day.
Mhm.
My life partner, like Adriana, she's like, okay, you're of course going to do that, make the bed. But I do, it's like my thing. So
Mhm.
for you, because you mentioned that there would be some days where you would just be able to make your bed. What
Mhm.
was happening to you during those days when it was just like that's
So,
what you do?
gosh, okay. I'm trying to think of like when I started. So like I was kind of like a casual bed maker for most of my life. Like some days I would do it, some days, whatever. Like the sheets aren't that rumpled, it's fine. But then I would say, so I wasn't fully in burnout at this point, but I was kind of heading towards it. It was probably like 2016, and there was a lot going on. Like there's some health issues with people in my family. Um, there had been a death in the family. I was working crazy insane hours. Like, my work shift was minimum of 10 hours a day anyways, but I was working closer to like 13 to 16 hours a day. And things were just untenable. I was in a relationship that wasn't super great, and that was kind of falling to pieces. And so there's like all of this stuff, and I was starting to head to a point where I wasn't making time for the things that make me happy. I just was kind of like grumpy. I felt like I would step into the day and the day was already demanding so much for me. And when I got to the end of the day, I would ask myself, like, what did I accomplish today? And I didn't feel like I accomplished anything that mattered to me. Like I might have accomplished stuff that mattered to other people, checked a lot of boxes, got a lot of stuff done at work, whatever it was. But for me, I didn't feel like I did anything that felt accomplishing for myself. Like I just wasn't putting value on what I was doing at work or what, like that didn't feel like a personal accomplishment. And so I was just kind of in this kind of difficult, depressy, like griefy, I don't know, like malaise almost, where I just felt like I'm not like there are no wins today. Like and you have too many days in a row where there's no wins, you're just like, well, what am I doing? And I read a book, and I think it's actually called Make Your Bed, and it's by I'd have to look it up, but it's by like an admiral or something. It's a really short, easy read. And that was kind of like he talks about like his kind of principles for like winning and whatever. But kind of the tenet of it is like making the bed is the first one of the day. And I don't know how this book found me or how I found it, but like I'm in this really lousy time and I read this book and I'm like, well, that's it. Like, that's not too difficult. I can literally like get out of bed and turn around and make it. And I know if the rest of this day goes to complete shit, I did that thing for myself in my space, my sleeping space. It's neat and it's tidy and it's ready for me to get back into it. And so that I started doing that. And I was like, well, if nothing else goes right today, at least I know I'm in my bed. Like my room looks nice. And that gave me like a really good feeling. And that might sound really small or really dumb to some people, but if you're like really going through it or you're like headed to burnout, maybe you're already in it, everything feels huge. So for me, just like check win, like that felt good because I didn't feel like I had that at all. Like I wasn't making time or space for that. So for me, like that is a practice I have kept up every day. And if I take a nap, I get up from the nap and I make my bed again. So like it's just now it's ingrained. Like every time I make my bed, that's a win. And so starting the day knowing, like I said, everything else, no matter what happens, no matter what comes into my day, I have this commitment to myself where I do this. It's the first one of the day. It allows me to get momentum. I know that no matter what else, like I did this one thing for myself because it feels good to know that that's done. And I'm going to come back into my room at the end of the night, no matter how bad the day went, and look at my bed, you know? And so, yeah, I was just like in this really, I don't know, like sad place, I guess, is the only way to put it. And that felt like it was small enough and manageable enough that I can commit to doing this and let's just see where it goes. And like once I did that, I'm like, oh, well, that, barely took 30 seconds. What else can I do? And that's where I feel like the first one of the day, it builds up momentum for other good stuff to happen.
What was that journey like for having started to make your bed to then where you felt you were building momentum on top of momentum and feeling that consistency moving in the other direction of the spectrum of burnout? Because I always think about it as a spectrum every day. We're either moving towards hitting burnout or moving away from making burnout extinct. So for you, was that like all of a sudden overnight change, or was that over a gradual process of impact for making your bed in the morning?
I would say like the first couple days, I almost felt kind of silly about it. Like, well, this is like small and stupid. It doesn't matter. But I was like, I'm going to keep doing it anyways. Just see where it goes. And I would say pretty quickly, I felt a change in emotionally how I felt getting out of bed once I did that. And for me, like when I'm heading towards burnout, like I have a series of things that kind of happen. And one of the first things is like irritability. Like I get grumpy and then I'm grumpy at myself for being grumpy. And it's not to say that like there isn't the spectrum of human emotions. You're going to have good days, you're going to have bad days. But if I'm just irritable and I cannot pinpoint a reason why, that's a problem. That to me is like signaling something's wrong. And that's kind of the space where I was in, but it was beyond irritability at that point. It was also just like I said, like kind of like a sadness, like almost like depressy sort of feeling. So that in itself was kind of like, all right, I need to figure out how to get out of that. And I felt like if I had a win to look back on during the day, then maybe that would cheer me up a little bit. And like I said, the first couple days, I'm like, oh, this is dumb, but I'll stick with it. And then I did start to feel that reward. Like once the bed was made, I was like, ooh, I did that. Okay. And so I kind of felt that turn. And I think the other thing is, like I said, I wasn't making time and space during that time for the things that I know make me happy. So like maybe I wasn't journaling at all. I wasn't fitting in a workout. I was waking up, basically eating, going to work. I was at work for an absurd amount of time. I'd come home, maybe eat again, maybe not, go to bed, and then like do it all over again. And when I'm in this space of not doing anything for myself, I know I'm heading down like a dangerous path for me as far as like my mental state and how I feel. And I was already on that road, but I do feel like once that couple days went by and I felt that like feeling of accomplishment, it kind of almost like triggered something in my brain of like, okay, this feels good and you can do this with other things. And then it was kind of like that, like almost self-talk, the pep talk, like, okay, like, okay, you feel good making your bed. You know that if you take a few minutes to journal, your mind is going to feel less cluttered. Let me start doing that again. Or you've been skipping your workouts. Like, if you work out, even if it's like a walk or a quick run or whatever it is, like it doesn't have to be, an hour long workout, but you take 15-30 minutes of movement for yourself, you feel better. Okay, let me add that back in. And that's kind of the stuff that helps dig me back out. But I'd say at that time it was gradual, but it wasn't like a super long process. It only took me a few days to get that feeling of like, oh, I feel really good about this. Where else can I start to feel like this again?
What would you say to the person that wants that immediate reward? Because I think about that or they expect it, where all of a sudden, okay, next day I'm supposed to feel super energized and momentum is coming my way. Because I do talk about how with habit formation, there is that awkward phase at the beginning where it's just where you talk about the silly, it's weird, but like gonna, keep going to get to the next phase. What would you say to someone that's like, oh, but I thought this was supposed to happen right away?
So something I've come to realize, and this can kind of annoy people sometimes, a lot of how you feel is a choice. So like when you're super in the weeds, it's hard to see that. And I know that because I've been in the weeds where like there doesn't feel like there's a choice. But if you wake up every day and you're like, well, I thought this would be better. Why don't I feel better? Like, well, why don't you try not having a shitty attitude about it? Like, why don't we try to like hit the old switch for optimism? But that aside, right? Like, say you're in this really difficult place and you can't see the fact that there's a choice. So with anything, anytime you do anything new, it's going to feel uncomfortable. Like your body likes what's familiar, like your essence, like it's comfort, it's safety. Like when you start doing things different, your brain, everything's like, why are we doing this? This is dumb. This doesn't feel good. This is hard. I can't stick to this. And you automatically go to that negative chatter. Like that is just universal. Everyone does it. You want to keep, comfort is safety is kind of how I look at it. And so when you do something new, that's uncomfortable. There is a sense of, I think if you commit to trying something, try to commit up front. Like I'm going to do this for whatever that time frame might be, right? Like I think for me personally, if I do something for like a month and I kind of know by then with checking in with myself, like, is this helping me? Like, is this a positive add-on or am I just doing this for doing this sake kind of thing? Like I give myself enough time to really see if it changes anything. And if it doesn't change anything, maybe that's like not the best habit for you. Right. And I think that's part of the experimentation phase, like what energizes you versus what drains you. If you're adding all this stuff that drains you, well, that's not going to help you feel any better. But I think some of it in the beginning is make the commitment and set a time frame and give yourself a little bit of time to adjust. And the other thing is, like, we are such like immediate reward type of society at this point. I mean, that's why we, doom scroll social media and everything else. Like we want that feeling of goodness. And I don't think it's a bad thing where if something is gonna be a pick me up for you, right? If you're like, you know, a piece of chocolate. Like we're not getting out of control with the bad eating, but like if I stick to this habit, like every time after I do it, I can have a piece of chocolate or whatever it is, right? Like build in some type of reward to kind of keep you doing it and give yourself enough time to see if it's right for you. And I think there's ways of doing it that are healthier versus unhealthier. But I think a lot of it is just like in the beginning, commit to a time frame and you're going to have to push through. And like, don't start the day begrudging this thing that you're like, I want to try this. I have some degree of optimism, like, okay, it doesn't feel as good as I thought it would, but maybe tomorrow, rather than being like, this is stupid, which, like I said, I did that for the first few days and that doesn't feel good. But I had that time commitment in my mind of, I'm going to stick with this for a few weeks. I'm just going to do it. And let's just see if there's a change. And got through a few days and I'm like, oh wait, I do feel accomplished. So I think that's it. Some of it is like push through, and some of it is like, if you can build in a reward in some way, by all means do that if it's going to help you stick with it to get to the point where you can assess, is this right for me or is it not?
Well, so if I say this back, because I talk about how it could be hard if you have a timeline on it, because there's an end date.
Yeah.
And that can be difficult for all of a sudden, okay, now I'm going to go back to my old habit that I had.
Yes.
But if I hear what you're saying, it's like remembering that there's that timeline commitment, so that can help you get through that beginning awkward phase of like pushing through to say, okay, I'm going to do this for 30 days. But then there's this part where you all of a sudden have to reflect
That's the
on,
thing.
is this actually what has changed in my life?
Mhm.
And do I like that change, or is it draining? And then I can
Mhm.
then decide from there that it's going to be more than 30 days or whatever time.
Mhm.
So yeah, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and I think you're right. If you're like, I'm only going to do this for 30 days, and then you're going to stop, and you, of course, you're going to revert back. But I think that reflection piece is the thing that's important, because if you if you don't start doing something just because, you start doing something because you want to feel a certain way, you want some type of result. So if you don't reflect to see, hey, did I get that feeling I wanted, or did I get that result that I wanted? And if the answer is yes, then I mean, sure, go back to your old ways, and you're not going to, get that thing you said you wanted, or feel that way that you said you wanted to feel. Um, then by all means revert back. But I think if you reflect and actually really take the time, like, is this benefiting me? How do I feel when I do this thing? Like, for me, when I'm, say, walking outside for 15 minutes, I could be like a grumpy Gus, and I go outside and I'm walking. And like right now, especially, I haven't lived in an area where the leaves have changed since I was 18, since I moved away from Boston. Like, I've lived in like desert climates, or Orange County, California, where I went to college. Like, there was no like fall foliage going on. And right now there is. So I go outside and I just look around, and I'm like, my God, there's like so much beauty around me, and I'm happy and I'm smiling. And I know, like, that makes me feel good. It's like I've reflected on that. I've thought about it, like, how did I feel when I stepped out the door? How do I feel now when I get home? And I think that's kind of it. Like, if you're pushing yourself to keep going, 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 and you never check in with yourself, like, what am I doing? How is this making me feel? And it's not just with habits. Like, we've talked about this before, like the body check in throughout the day, like, check in with yourself. Because if, at noon you're like, oh man, I'm super tense and I'm kind of grumpy, like, okay, look at what you just did. Like, did those things make you feel that way? Is it the order of things? Is it the amount of time you did it? Is it the fact that you haven't taken a break in 4 hours, and you have to pee really bad because like, you're just in the work? Like, you have to check in with yourself, whether it's throughout the day or you're adding new habits, because that's the only way you're going to know, is what I'm doing working for me.
Well, and it's what comes up for me as an observation I noticed it in my own life because I felt such intense fear and resistance towards bringing in new habits that would stick. Because
Mm-hmm.
then for me, the fear was, well, this is now going to lead me down a path of uncertainty for my future. It's going to open up possibilities
Mm-hmm.
and doorways to new avenues that I could travel on, if that's career, personal life, relationships. But that's super scary.
Mm-hmm.
And that is an observation that I feel for an observation I make for why I feel people are so resistant to
Mm-hmm.
making something permanent, or making a bringing in a new habit that sticks. But I wanted to get your take on that, of why there can be a lot of people that stick with something and then they drop off from that habit, even though it may have been benefiting them and they really wanted to, and then it's all of a sudden a few months later they come back to trying to get it back on track to becoming a habit. um,
Mm-hmm.
why do you feel like there is that drop off that can happen?
I think you kind of just hit the nail on the head, right? Like, when you start doing new things, it is inevitably going to change you. It's going to open you up to new possibilities. Maybe, like I said, if it's, like, maybe you tried pickleball. You're like, I need to move a little bit more. I want to be around people. Everybody keeps talking about pickleball. I'm going to go to some pickleball courts and try that out. And I say this because I've been longing to try pickleball. So now that I have moved and I'm settled, that's on the to-do list. But so you're like, okay, I'm going to try this. And, every Thursday evening, I'm going to go and I'm going to play. And, and you feel good, you're meeting new people. But then you start to realize, well, okay, I'm spending time with these people. I have less time for these people, and it's kind of like a big example. But if, when you start down a path of change, you're going to be different to the people that are around you, whether it's the workplace, at home, your relationships. And when you see that stuff start to change and you don't really know how to fix it, or like, what do I do about that? Do I address it? Do I talk about it? Like, we don't talk as much, or we don't have as much in common, or, whatever that might look like. It's scary. So it's easier just to like, let me just go back to the way it was, because like, coming home and being with my partner, well, this is uncomfortable. Well, I don't want that, so I'll stop doing this thing, even though I feel really great when I do it. And I think that's a big part of it, is like, you're changing, everything else around you isn't necessarily changing in the same way, and that feels uncomfortable. So rather than kind of work through that uncomfortable feeling or have whatever uncomfortable conversations need to be had, it's like, well, I'll just go back because that's easier. And I do think that has a big thing. Like, if you're the person in your house that's like, I'm only going to eat, be like, I'm going to eat clean. Like, I'm not going to eat processed foods right now. I'm sticking to the outside of the supermarket, meats, veggies, whatever it is. And the other people in your house aren't doing that. Well, now you're not eating the same food as them. Maybe you're not eating at the same time as them. Maybe your food is making you feel way more energized and positive. Well, they're, kind of stuck in their bad mood. And that's creating like, just kind of this feeling of almost animosity in the house, right? Like, everybody's not on the same page anymore. And I think when you start to have those disconnects in your relationships, especially, it almost pulls you back to being the way that you were. And sometimes it's just within ourselves. Like, if I start doing this and I feel great and I meet these people and all these doors open up, like, what is that going to mean? What is that going to do to my time? What is that going to do to my relationship? And you start almost spiraling before even any of it happens. And you're like, well, that's scary. And I just think for myself, as I kind of go into these different evolutions and different habits, spending time with different types of people, going to different events, am I 100% content with every single thing in my life right now? It's great if the answer is yes. Maybe it is for some people. And it's not always like a chasing something, but I can always look and say, I could have some more energy here, or I could be more excited about this. And I feel like if I'm the type of person that kind of likes to optimize and elevate. So if I know that, and it's not, like I said, it's not about chasing a thing. It's more for me like a feeling, and how do I want to show up? So if I know if I do this and I'm going to be happier and I'm going to have more energy, if a lot of other things are uncomfortable because of it, but I know that's going to like make me better, make me show up better, I'm probably going to push through the discomfort and do it anyways. But I think, like you said, it's just, things get really uncomfortable and it's safer to go back. It feels better in the moment, not in the long term.
And it's so important to realize that, like, I feel for the way that it comes up for me for the future of how I'm moving through life, is that by growing and expanding, all of a sudden I'm realizing that life is more exciting and it's not boring. I think that's a fear that can come up, of contentment, that I have to struggle with, because there's all that messaging of, okay, accept where you are and just be content and be, feel like satisfied with all the things around you. But then for me, boring comes up when I hear that, of just like settling with that. And so all of a sudden then it goes into, well, what's going to bring excitement that can lead into happiness? Well, it's variety, it's growth, it's new opportunities. And that could be something where someone else could be wrestling with that too, of, okay, I'm getting all this messaging, I'm supposed to be content, but then I have this urge or desire to go, but I'm super scared. And there's that. So for someone that's in that moment of like, I feel I could move forward for growth, but then there's that fear that comes up of, I want to keep things as they are and not cause too much uncertainty. What would be like a message you tell that person?
So I think there's two things. I think you can hold more than one thing at a time. So you could be really grateful, appreciative, and even like proud, satisfied with what you've built, but you can still have a knowing that this isn't it. And I think a lot of times there's this push where you can only be one or the other. You can only be satisfied and grateful, but that means you can't want anything else. I think that you can have both at the same time. So I don't think it's an either or. That's the first thing. And I think the other thing is, people think that you need this grand sweeping change for like to arrive at this place in your life. And on a recent podcast episode, I said, like, as great as it would be to like be in the Maldives in your overwater bungalow, like living your best life every day, right? Even that's going to get old at some point, because it's not like this big grand thing that you need. It's the small things that bring you joy, bring you peace, make you feel good, create the feeling that you want to feel in your day. And it's kind of stacking those things. Like, you don't have to, if you don't want too much uncertainty, you don't have to change everything at once. Like, pick one small thing and start there. See how that makes you feel. And then maybe add something else. Or sometimes it's taking away. Like, you start doing this thing and you realize, hey, this other thing that I do every day actually doesn't serve me. Stop doing it. And it doesn't need to be like a big sweep and change. It could just be like starting super, super small and then building on that and peeling away at the same time, and whatever you need to do. But you don't have to go from this way of life and make this drastic leap, massive like levels up or forward or whatever. Like, it's more of a gradual. And again, it comes back to checking in with yourself. Like, are these changes good changes? Do I like where I'm going? If not, okay, let me reassess. Or like I said, maybe I need to stop doing this thing rather than add this thing. And I think that's what it really comes down to, is like starting really small, because small is sustainable. That's the other thing. Like, if you try to do all of these things at once, you're probably not going to stick with any of them, never mind one of them. So if you start super small and you kind of see where that's going, see where it's leading, how you feel, it also doesn't feel as scary because it's like one tiny small thing, like the 15-minute walk. Like, that's not a big chunk of your day. That's not, this overt physical commitment. Like, it's not all of these things. But if you're not moving at all, like 15-minute walk, you do that for a week, you're going to feel different pretty quick. and I think that's the important thing, is like, you don't have to do these huge sweeping changes all at once. And that's where things get scary, is when you try to do that. But if you start small, it's more of a gradual, sustainable process.
Thank you, Adrienne. I appreciate you. So many valuable insights and lessons that I know someone listening can take in and apply in their own life.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm grateful for you taking the time to be able to share that with the audience and the community. It fires me up. So I appreciate you.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me. I just wanted to leave with one more thing. If you feel like maybe you're headed towards burnout and you're like, I don't know, like, for me, I did reach burnout at one point in my career, and I ended up leaving my job, not because of the burnout. There are several, that definitely added to it, but there are a lot of things that kind of compounded with the situation and knowing that I wanted to follow my own path. But my body was screaming at me. Like, I've had headaches since I was a kid, but maybe like once a week. I had a headache every day. And if I took enough medicine where it went away, it'd be gone for like 2 hours and it would be back. Like, I was waking up like 7 times a night, and I was barely sleeping 5 to 6 hours as it was. And I think my body, between the headaches, the sleep issues, the irritability, like, all of that was screaming at me to change something, and I didn't. And so I would say, like, check in with yourself. And if your body like doesn't feel right, especially if you got some kind of chronic issue that's all of a sudden popping up, like, something is going on there, and you have to take a pause and figure it out, or you're going to like go fast down that road of burnout.
Appreciate you. If people want to learn more about your work, how do they find you?
So on Instagram, it's @_ Adrienne Crowley, and my website is www.adriencrowley.com, and pretty much everything that I do and offer is on there.
We'll put some, I'll definitely get some links in there too, so we can check it out. Thank you so much.
Yes. I always love talking to you. Thank you so much. And I love your mission right now. Like, this is powerful, amazing stuff.
If you like this episode, please don't forget to rate this podcast to help get this message out of Make Burnout Extinct. And you can share what resonates with you from this episode by connecting with me on Instagram or LinkedIn. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this episode. I don't take that for granted. So excited to reconnect again soon with you.